r/MaliciousCompliance My sister stole my baby name, so I wrote her obituary. #Chunk1. I stared at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only 30 seconds. My hands were shaking, not from fear or uncertainty, but from pure, unadulterated joy. After 3 years of trying, countless disappointed periods, and one devastating miscarriage, this was actually happening. I was going to be a mother. The first person I wanted to tell was my husband, obviously. The second person I wanted to tell was my sister, Jessica. Or so I thought. I called her that same afternoon, my voice practically vibrating with excitement through the phone. "Jess, I have something to tell you. Something big." There was a pause on the other end. Not the pregnant kind of pause you expect before good news. A different kind. A knowing kind. "Oh my God, you're pregnant," she said. Not a question, really. A statement. "Yes." "How did you?" "Yeah, so am I." I felt the wind get knocked out of me. "You, what?" "I'm pregnant," she repeated, and I could hear the smile in her voice. The triumphant smile. I was going to tell everyone at Mom's dinner party this Sunday, but I guess that's ruined now. Jessica is 4 years older than me. We'd never been the type of sisters who were close, exactly, but we weren't enemies either, more like 2 people who shared parents and nothing else. She'd always been competitive in that exhausting way older siblings sometimes are. When I made the volleyball team, she suddenly became obsessed with tennis. When I got accepted to my first choice college, she reminded everyone she'd turned down a better school for practical reasons. It was like living with someone who was constantly playing a game only they understood the rules too. But a baby. Her baby. Before I'd even had time to really process my own. That's amazing, I managed, and I meant it, sort of. "When are you due?" "October 15th, she said. 3 weeks before you, I'm guessing?" "November 2nd, I confirmed." "So close," she said, and there it was again, that tone. Like she'd won something. I decided not to let it bother me. Jessica could have her moment. I had something she could never take from me, anyway. I had Evangeline. I'd been in love with that name since I was 14 years old. It was my grandmother's name, my father's mother, who'd passed away when I was 12. Evangeline Mary Rodriguez had been exactly the kind of woman I wanted to become, fierce, brilliant, unapologetically herself, and endlessly kind. She'd raised 5 children on a teacher's salary, volunteered at the community center, and never once made you feel like you were bothering her, even when you probably were. I used to sit in her kitchen while she made empanadas, and she'd tell me stories about my grandfather, about moving to this country, about learning English by watching soap operas. When she died, I felt like a piece of the world had gone dark. Naming my daughter Evangeline wasn't just about having a pretty name. It was about keeping her alive in the way that mattered most, by passing her legacy to the next generation. I told Jessica this. Explicitly. When I was 16 and crying about a boy, and Jessica was actually being semi-human for once, I'd said, "You know what I want to do someday? Name my daughter Evangeline. After Abuela. So she'll grow up knowing that name, knowing where it came from." Jessica had wrinkled her nose. "Evangeline? That's so old-fashioned." "So, extra. You could name her something normal, like Emma or Sophie." I'd shrugged it off. Jessica thought everything I did was extra. That was just Jessica. But I should have known better. The Sunday dinner party came around, and I watched my mother's face light up as Jessica announced her pregnancy. Then, before Jessica could even finish congratulating me, she said the words that would change everything. "And I'm having a girl," she announced. "Her name is going to be Evangeline." The room went silent. I remember my father's fork stopping halfway to his mouth. My mother's smile flickering like a bad light bulb. "Evangeline," my mother said carefully. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd heard me talk about this name approximately 8,000 times. "Yes," Jessica said, and she was looking right at me when she said it. "I think it's the perfect name. Classic, elegant, sophisticated." "Jessica," I said, and my voice sounded very far away, like it was coming from underwater. "That's Abuela's name." "I told you I was planning to." "You told me a lot of things when you were 16, Jessica interrupted. "I didn't think you were serious. Besides, I thought of it independently. It's a beautiful name. Why can't we both use it?" "Because we can't both use it," I said, my hands beginning to shake again. "Because I've been planning this for literally half my life. Because it means something to me. It's Abuela." "It's a name," Jessica said flatly. "It's not like you own it. And honestly, I think it suits my daughter better anyway. She's going to be elegant and refined, and I think." I stood up. I actually stood up and walked out of my mother's dining room while Jessica was still talking. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried in a way I hadn't cried since the miscarriage. The bathroom was dark and small and it smelled like my mother's lavender soap, and I sat on the closed toilet and felt something break inside me. My sister had stolen my baby's name. Not borrowed it. Not suggested it as an option while I still got to use it. She had taken it, claimed it, and was carrying it inside her like it had always belonged to her. Over the following weeks, I tried everything. I texted her long, emotional explanations about what Evangeline meant to me. I asked my mother to intervene. I even, in a moment of desperation, offered to buy her an expensive stroller if she'd reconsider. She blocked my number for 3 days after that one. It was my husband, Marcus, who first noticed the change in me. I'd stopped sleeping well. I couldn't look at baby names without feeling physically ill. When we went to buy nursery furniture, I couldn't bring myself to go into the store. I sat in the car and cried while he was inside, choosing things alone. "This isn't okay," he said one night, holding me while I sobbed into his pillow. "This is eating you alive, and frankly, Jessica's being a bitch." "She's not going to change her mind," I whispered. "She's won. She always wins." But Marcus, bless him, just held me tighter and didn't say anything. Which meant he was thinking about something. I should have asked what. #Chunk2. The worst part about being wronged by someone is that you have to keep seeing them. If Jessica had been a stranger, I could have simply erased her from my life. But she was my sister, which meant she was woven into the fabric of my family in a way that couldn't be easily unpicked. She was at family dinners. She was in the group chat. She was texting my mother about her nursery design while I was trying not to have a panic attack in Target's baby section. 2 weeks after the dinner party disaster, my mother called me in a state of barely contained frustration. She's planning a shower, my mom said without preamble. A baby shower. For next month. And she wants to do a theme around, my mother paused, and I could hear her breathing like she was bracing for impact, around the name. Something about Evangeline's garden with floral arrangements and vintage name cards. I felt something hot and dark bloom in my chest. She's really leaning into it, my mom continued, her voice careful. Like, really going all in. I think maybe if you just talk to her again. No, I said. Honey. No, Mom. I'm done talking to her. I'm done explaining. I'm done asking her to understand something that shouldn't require explanation. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at nothing. Marcus was at work. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. And that's when I felt it, that dangerous combination of grief and rage that only injustice can create. The kind of feeling that makes you do stupid things. I didn't immediately act on it. I sat with it for 3 days. I let it ferment. I went to bed angry and woke up angry. I went to my OB appointment and cried when the ultrasound tech asked if I wanted to know the baby's name yet. I came home and stared at my laptop screen for an hour without opening it. But on day 4, I opened a blank document. I told myself I was just venting. Just writing down my feelings in a creative way. Just exploring what it might look like to publicly humiliate my sister the way she'd publicly humiliated me. It was therapeutic, I reasoned. Healthy, even. Like journaling, but with more vindictiveness. The document I created was formatted like an obituary. I pulled up examples from the local newspaper, the Millbrook Gazette, which my mother read every morning with her coffee. I studied the format. The tone. The way these things were written. And then I started typing. Evangeline Jessica Rodriguez, 34, of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, passed away unexpectedly on March 15 after a brief illness caused by acute sibling rivalry and chronic name-stealing syndrome. She is survived by her devastated parents, her sister, who was right all along, and a daughter named Evangeline who will spend her entire life explaining why there are 2 of them. I laughed while I wrote it. Actually laughed. It was dark and horrible and probably not something I should have been doing, but it felt so good to let it out. To have my anger exist somewhere outside of my own body. I kept writing. I added details. I mentioned her lifelong competitive spirit and her inability to accept that her sister had one thing she wanted. I included a quote from family sources that said Jessica had always been this way. I was vicious and specific and absolutely, completely unhinged. And then I saved the document and closed my laptop. For 2 days, it sat there. I didn't think about it constantly, maybe only every 15 minutes or so. I told myself it was just something I'd written to get the feelings out. That it was cathartic and I'd move on. That publishing it would be insane and I would never, ever do that. But Jessica's shower invitations arrived in the mail on Wednesday. They were beautiful. Cream-colored cardstock with pressed flowers, Evangeline's enchanted garden baby shower, they read. April 22nd. Mommy and me themed. The artwork featured watercolor renderings of baby animals among flowers. It was genuinely lovely, and it made me want to scream. The thing about small towns is that everyone knows everything. Millbrook has maybe 15,000 people, which means that by Friday afternoon, everyone had heard about Jessica's shower. My hairdresser asked me if I was excited. The woman at the grocery store congratulated me and then asked if Jessica was having a girl too. Even the barista at my favorite coffee shop mentioned it, saying he'd heard the decorations were going to be absolutely stunning. That night, Marcus found me at my laptop. I wasn't looking at the obituary, I was looking at the Millbrook Gazette website, at their contact page, at the email address for community submissions. What are you doing? He asked. Nothing, I said too quickly. Just looking at something. He came around and looked over my shoulder. When he saw what was on the screen, he didn't say anything for a long moment. Don't, he finally said. I'm not. Don't, he repeated. Whatever you're thinking, don't. You don't even know what I'm thinking. I know you, and I know that look. And I'm telling you right now that whatever satisfaction you think you'll get from whatever you're about to do won't be worth it. I closed the laptop. You're right. I know you're right. But I kept the document. I kept the Gazette's contact information. And I kept checking my email to see if there were any new shower-related updates. Jessica sent a message to the family group chat on Sunday morning. Family is welcome at the shower, of course. I'd love for everyone to celebrate baby Evangeline with me. Baby Evangeline. My baby Evangeline. The one who was supposed to be mine. That night, after Marcus was asleep, I opened the document again. I read through it. I made some edits. I polished it up. And then, before I could think better of it, before I could remember all the reasons why this was a bad idea, I copied the entire obituary into an email. My finger hovered over the send button for what felt like an eternity. And then I pressed it. I hit send before I could stop myself, before my rational brain could catch up to my angry brain. The email disappeared into the void, addressed to the Millbrook Gazette submissions inbox, and I sat there in the dark of my kitchen, my heart pounding, realizing what I'd just done. I'd actually done it. I'd written my sister's fake obituary and sent it to the local newspaper. And there was no taking it back. #chunk3. The next morning, I woke up with a distinct sensation of having made a terrible mistake. It wasn't the slow-dawning realization of regret, it was immediate and visceral, like someone had dunked my head in ice water the moment consciousness hit. My eyes snapped open in the dark, and I lay there listening to Marcus breathe beside me, feeling my stomach twist into knots as the memory of last night crashed over me. I'd actually done it. I'd actually sent it. I didn't get out of bed right away. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, running through all the ways this could go wrong. The newspaper might not publish it. That was the best-case scenario, wasn't it? They'd see it as a prank submission and delete it without a second thought. The Millbrook Gazette was a semi-professional operation, they probably got weird stuff all the time. They wouldn't publish a fake obituary. That would be irresponsible. That would be. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Marcus stood beside me, making a vague grumbling sound, and I carefully extracted myself from the bed and padded into the bathroom before I did anything stupid like checking my messages. I sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the tiles for what felt like hours but was probably only 5 minutes. I needed coffee. I needed to think. I needed to figure out if there was any possible way to contact the Gazette and pull the submission before. No, I couldn't do that. That would require explaining what I'd done, and the moment I admitted to having sent it, I might as well publish it myself. Better to just assume it wouldn't run. Better to assume it would be forgotten by Monday. By the time I got downstairs, Marcus had made coffee. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between concern and resignation. Your phone's been blowing up, he said, handing me a mug. You've got like 30 messages. I felt my chest tighten. From who? Mostly the group chat. Some individual texts. I didn't look at them all, you know I respect your privacy, but I caught enough to know that something's happened. I didn't move toward my phone. I couldn't. If I didn't check it, it wasn't real yet. It was still in that moment of possibility where maybe nothing had actually happened, where maybe I dreamed the whole thing. What time is it? I asked instead. 7:30. The Millbrook Gazette would have been available online for at least an hour by now. The print edition wouldn't hit porches until mid-morning, but their online community section updated early. And if they'd published the obituary, if they'd actually run it, then it would be out there. Out in the world. Irretrievable. I can't look at the phone right now, I said quietly. Marcus nodded like he understood, which somehow made it worse. He didn't ask questions. He didn't lecture me. He just set down his own coffee and pulled me into a hug, and I realized that wherever this was about to go, I was about to take him along with me. Whatever it is, he said into my hair, we'll figure it out. I spent the next hour in a state of suspended panic. I showered. I got dressed. I tried to eat toast but couldn't get it down. Marcus left for work at 8:30 with a kiss on my forehead that felt like goodbye, and I sat alone in the kitchen with my untouched coffee, too terrified to check my messages. At 9 o'clock, my mother called. I watched the phone ring. Watched her name appear and disappear as the call went to voicemail. Then immediately she called again, which she only did in emergencies. I answered. What did you do? My mother said, not as a greeting but as an accusation. Honey, what on earth did you do? Mom, Jessica is at my house. She's hysterical. She's been hysterical since someone sent her a screenshot of the Millbrook Gazette obituary page at 6 this morning, and now she's in my living room, and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm trying to figure out how you thought this was going to end. The world tilted. They published it. They actually published it. It's not real, I said, which was stupid and obvious and entirely unhelpful. I know it's not real. My mother's voice cracked in a way that made me feel about 5 years old. That's actually worse. Jessica knows it's not real too, which means she's not calling the police to report a death, which means she's just furious and humiliated and everyone in town is seeing her name in the obituary section. I couldn't speak. I couldn't form words. I could only sit there and visualize the Millbrook Gazette's website, the obituaries page, my sister's name in that formal, official font that made everything real. Do you understand what you've done? My mother continued, and there were tears in her voice now. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to our family? Jessica is pregnant and stressed, and now there's a fake obituary about her on the internet. That's not my problem, I heard myself say. That's not my. It is exactly your problem, because you created it. My mother took a shaky breath. Your father's at the house trying to calm Jessica down, and I'm calling to tell you that you need to contact the newspaper immediately and ask them to take it down. You need to explain that it was a mistake, that it was submitted by someone else, that. I can't do that. You absolutely can. I can't, because then they'll know it was me, and Jessica will press charges for defamation or libel or whatever, and I'll have a legal case on top of everything else. The line went quiet. In that silence, I could hear the enormity of what I'd done echoing back at me. Oh my God, my mother whispered. You meant to do this. You actually meant to hurt your sister like this. She hurt me first, I said, and I sounded like a child. She hurt me first, and she wouldn't care, and you all took her side. No one took her side. We asked you both to compromise. We asked you to talk to her. We didn't ask you to publicly humiliate her. After my mother hung up, I sat very still. My phone continued buzzing. I didn't look at it. I just sat in my kitchen in my small suburban house with my baby growing inside me, understanding with absolute clarity that I had done something I could never undo, and that unlike the obituary, this damage was completely, unquestionably real. #Chunk 4. The thing about small towns is that they move at the speed of gossip, which is considerably faster than the speed of light. By noon, the obituary had been screenshot, shared, forwarded, and discussed in at least 7 different Facebook groups, 3 neighborhood apps, and what I would later learn was a dedicated text chain that included basically everyone we'd gone to high school with. I finally looked at my phone at 11:47 a.m., sitting alone in my living room with the curtains drawn like some kind of modern hermit, and found 147 unread messages. Not all of them were angry. Some were worse, they were amused. There were actual laughing crying emojis. There were people I hadn't spoken to in a decade sliding into my DMs with variations of "this is absolutely unhinged and I'm obsessed." There were screenshots of the obituary being shared on Reddit with captions like "this is the most petty thing I've ever read and okay, but did she deserve it though?" The obituary itself was somehow more damaging in print than it had been in my head. The Millbrook Gazette had used their standard obituary template, which made it look official. Professional. Real in a way that made the lies even more cutting. Jessica Marie Hartley, 30, passed away peacefully on March 15th from acute sibling rivalry and chronic name-stealing syndrome. She is survived by her parents, David and Catherine, her husband Richard, and her unborn daughter, whose name she did not get to steal *. Services will not be held because Jessica would have found a way to take credit for the eulogies. I had added that last line at 2 a.m. in a fit of particular creativity that I now deeply, deeply regretted. The comments section on the Gazette's website was a complete dumpster fire. Half the people were calling for my arrest. The other half were defending me on some abstract principle about sibling rivalry being the real pandemic. Someone had created a meme of Jessica's actual baby announcement photo, which she posted to Facebook 3 weeks ago, because she couldn't help herself, with text that said breaking news, local woman's entire personality is apparently petty. It had been shared 4,000 times. The worst part was that Jessica's husband Richard had apparently gone full damage control, which meant he'd hired a lawyer. My mother had left a second voicemail mentioning this fact with a kind of ominous tone usually reserved for terminal diagnoses. Your sister's husband is exploring legal options, she'd said. They're not saying defamation yet, but they're exploring options. Which options, exactly? I googled on my laptop with a kind of frantic desperation usually reserved for WebMD diagnoses. False light invasion of privacy? Intentional infliction of emotional distress? I read about a woman who'd been sued for writing negative Yelp reviews and felt my stomach drop somewhere into the vicinity of my ankles. My phone rang at 12:34 p.m. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway because I was past the point of rational decision-making. Miss Hartley? A man's voice, professional and clipped. This is Michael Chen. I'm a reporter with the Millbrook Chronicle. I was wondering if you'd like to comment on the viral obituary situation for a piece I'm writing? I hung up immediately. 3 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. I almost didn't answer it. Every self-preservation instinct I had was screaming not to answer it. But the knock came again, more insistent, and I had this paranoid thought that maybe it was a lawyer serving me with papers, and hanging up on that would probably only make things worse. It was my friend Sarah, who I'd known since 4th grade and hadn't actually spoken to in 6 months because my pregnancy had made me a hermit and her busy schedule had made her unavailable. She looked like she'd driven over immediately, her hair still wet from what was probably a shower. Oh my God, she said, pushing past me into the house. The internet is losing its mind. People are tweeting about this in other states. There's a TikTok. There's a TikTok? Multiple TikToks. You're trending on Twitter in 3 different countries. There's a hashtag now. Hashtag name stealing syndrome. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts horror and fascination. What were you thinking? I wasn't, I said flatly. That's kind of the problem. Sarah followed me into the kitchen and sat down at the table without being invited, which felt like the kind of friendship marker I desperately needed right now. Okay, so here's what I know. Jessica's apparently not pressing charges yet. Yet being the operative word. But Richard is taking it very seriously. He's calling it a vicious attack on their family's reputation. Your mom is devastated. Your dad apparently told Jessica that the whole thing is ridiculous but also kind of funny, which made everything worse. And Jessica herself has gone full victim, which is actually making people online sympathize with her, which is wild because usually the internet tears pregnant women to shreds. That's good, right? I asked, grasping at straws. If people are sympathizing with her, then maybe she'll calm down. No, it's bad, because now she has public support, which means Richard's lawyer looks like he's representing someone who was genuinely wronged rather than someone who stole a baby name from her sister. Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled. Listen to this headline, local woman's prank escalates to public humiliation. Is sibling rivalry ever defensible? That's from a think piece that was published on Medium 40 minutes ago. It's already got 12,000 reads. I felt something inside me start to crack. This had been supposed to stay contained. This had been supposed to be a private matter between me and Jessica and our family. It was supposed to hurt her in the way she'd hurt me, quietly, deeply, personally. Instead, I turned it into performance art. Your OB called, Sarah said gently, looking at her notes. Your mom gave her the number. She wanted to make sure you're doing okay given the stress. My OB knows about the obituary? Everyone knows about the obituary. My accountant texted me about it. My accountant's husband, who I've never even met, texted about it. I put my head down on the kitchen table and seriously considered whether it was possible to die of embarrassment. The baby kicked as if in agreement, reminding me that not only had I done this monumentally stupid thing, but I had done it while responsible for another human being's existence. What do I do? I asked the table. Sarah didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was very quiet. I think you need to apologize. Publicly. Before Richard's lawyer makes this into an actual legal situation. I lifted my head to look at her. She won't accept it. Probably not, Sarah agreed. But it won't matter. Because this isn't about Jessica anymore. It's about you. And right now, you look like someone who thought humiliation was an acceptable response to being hurt. She wasn't wrong. The worst part was, she absolutely wasn't wrong. Hashtag chunk 5. The apology was harder to write than the obituary had been. At least with the obituary, I'd had anger to fuel me. I'd had the white-hot certainty that I was wronged, that Jessica deserved to understand how deep her betrayal cut, that public humiliation was somehow a proportional response to private heartbreak. Writing the apology meant confronting the fact that I'd been wrong, not about Jessica stealing the name, but about how I'd handled it. And there's something uniquely painful about admitting that when the whole internet is watching. Sarah stayed with me for most of the afternoon, which I was grateful for even though it meant I had to articulate my thoughts out loud instead of just spiraling internally like a normal person. She sat at my kitchen table with her laptop open, pulling up articles about defamation law, crisis management, and what other people had done when they'd made viral mistakes. Apparently, there was a whole playbook for this, and it started with sincere contrition. You need to post it everywhere the obituary appeared, Sarah said, adjusting her glasses. The Millbrook Gazette website, your personal social media, maybe even Reddit if you're feeling particularly brave. You need to be the one controlling the narrative before Richard's lawyer does it for you. What do I even say? I asked. I'm sorry, I publicly humiliated my sister seems a little inadequate when it's been shared 5,000 times. You say the truth. That you were hurt. That you handled it badly. That you regret it. And then you actually regret it, which is the part you need to work on first. I did regret it. That was the thing that kept me up as I stared at a blank Google Doc for the next 3 hours. I regretted the way it had spiraled, the way it had taken something deeply personal and turned it into entertainment. But I was also still angry. That anger was sitting in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable, and I wasn't sure how to write an apology that didn't feel like swallowing it whole. My phone rang at 4:47 p.m. My mother. Don't say anything yet, she said before I could even finish my greeting. Your father and I are coming over. Mom. Jessica called. She's very upset. Richard wants to press charges for defamation, but Jessica is refusing. She says she wants to talk to you first. My heart rate picked up. She's coming here? I don't know. She's at home. She's pregnant and upset, and frankly, I think everyone involved in this situation needs to sit down and have an actual conversation instead of doing things like writing fake obituaries. My mother's voice had taken on that particular tone, the one that suggested she was disappointed in a way that was somehow worse than anger. We'll be there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I looked at Sarah, who had clearly heard the gist of this conversation from my end and was now making a face like she'd swallowed a lemon. Are you going to let her in? Sarah asked. I don't know. Should I? Probably. Publicly refusing to see her would look worse than sitting down and talking. Sarah was already gathering her things. I'm going to go, though. This needs to be family. Don't leave me alone with them, I said immediately, which was perhaps more honest than was dignified. You need to do this without me, Sarah said, not unkindly. You need to show that you're taking this seriously, not that you need your friend to moderate like your children. She grabbed her purse. But I'm literally one call away. If anything goes sideways, call me and I'll come back. She left. I spent the next 20 minutes doing the kind of frantic tidying that accomplishes nothing, straightening pillows, closing cabinet doors, throwing things in the closet like the physical appearance of my house mattered when my life was currently imploding. I changed my shirt 3 times, trying to land somewhere between person who made a terrible mistake and person who is currently pregnant and therefore entitled to some baseline of sympathy. My parents arrived first. My father looked tired in the way he gets when forced to be in the middle of conflict. My mother looked like she was conducting an autopsy of my decision-making process. They came into the living room and sat down without much preamble. Jessica will be here in about 10 minutes, my mother said. She's bringing Richard. Oh my God. Yes, exactly. So here's what's going to happen. You are going to apologize. You are going to mean it. And then we are all going to discuss whether Richard has any actual legal grounds to pursue this, which according to the lawyer your father consulted, he probably doesn't, but that doesn't mean he won't be vindictive about it anyway. You consulted a lawyer? This was news to me. Of course I consulted a lawyer, my father said. The moment your mother told me about the legal threats, I called someone. Family law. They said the obituary is borderline, and the fact that it was clearly satire and published in a satirical context probably provides some protection, but your sister's husband is apparently the type who likes to make points. I felt something loosen slightly in my chest. At least there was a chance I wouldn't end up in actual court. But then the doorbell rang, and that relief evaporated entirely. Jessica looked worse than I'd expected. She was visibly swollen in that way that happens in the 3rd trimester, her face puffy, her eyes red-rimmed. Richard stood next to her like a guard dog, his jaw tight, his expression the kind of cold that suggested he'd been composing angry speeches the entire drive over. No one sat down. We all just stood in my living room like we were at a funeral, which I suppose we technically were, a funeral for whatever relationship I had left with my sister. I'm sorry, I said immediately. I'm sorry for writing the obituary. I'm sorry for submitting it to the newspaper. I'm sorry for the humiliation and the public nature of it and for letting my anger override my judgment. Jessica's eyes welled up, but she didn't say anything. Richard did. An apology after the fact doesn't erase the damage. My wife has been publicly humiliated. Their entire family has been humiliated. There are memes of her. There are TikToks mocking her. There are people in this town who are going to remember this for years. I know, I said quietly. I know, and I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it, Richard said. But he wasn't wrong. And nothing I said next was going to change that. #chunk6. The silence that followed Richard's statement stretched across the living room like something physical. My mother shifted slightly, and my father cleared his throat, both of them the kind of micro-movements people make when they're wondering if they should intervene. What exactly are you asking for? I said to Richard, because standing there apologizing into the void wasn't going to move this forward. Legal action? A retraction? Money? Richard's jaw tightened further, which I didn't think was physically possible. I want you to understand the scope of what you've done. Jessica is due in 5 weeks. 5 weeks. She's supposed to be resting, nesting, preparing for our daughter. Instead, she's been fielding calls from people at her OBGYN's office who recognized her from Reddit. Her mother-in-law called her a mean girl based on a fake obituary written by her own sister. Richard, Jessica said quietly, and her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying for hours. That's not. It's exactly what happened, he said, not looking at her. And now you're standing here accepting an apology like that somehow makes it better. Actually, my father said, in that careful lawyer-adjacent tone he gets when he's about to say something uncomfortable, I'm not sure what Richard's legal position is here. The obituary was clearly satirical. It was published in a satirical section. There's no defamation claim if the statement is obviously not factual. It doesn't matter if there's a legal claim, Richard said coldly. What matters is the damage. What matters is my wife's mental health. What matters is that the entire town knows that her sister, her own sister, thought she was worthy of being written about like she was dead. I felt my face flush. I was angry. I was hurt. I know it was wrong, and I'm sorry. You keep saying that, Richard said, but you don't seem to grasp why it was so wrong. You didn't just insult Jessica. You made her a cautionary tale. You made her someone that people laugh at. Do you know what happened at the grocery store yesterday? No one answered. He didn't seem to expect us to. Someone recognized Jessica and asked if the chronic name-stealing syndrome ran in the family. As a joke. While she was standing in the produce section trying to pick out bananas. His voice had gone very quiet, which was somehow more frightening than when he was angry. That's what you did to her. My mother made a small noise, something between sympathy and exasperation. Richard, I understand you're upset, but... Do you? He asked, turning to her. Do you understand what it's like to watch your wife cry because strangers on the internet are mocking her for a choice she made about naming her daughter? A choice that, I might add, wasn't actually a betrayal. They're due 2 weeks apart. They're having different genders. There's no actual conflict here except the one that exists in your daughter's head. That hit different. I'd been so focused on the violation, the theft, the betrayal of my years-long dream that I hadn't actually sat with the fact that Jessica was having a son. The name Evangeline wouldn't have been his anyway. Her daughter Evangeline and my daughter Evangeline, yes, that would have been a problem. But I'd somehow glossed over the fact that her baby was male while constructing this narrative of wrongdoing. I didn't know it was a boy, I said slowly. No, Jessica said, speaking for the first time directly to me. Because you didn't ask. You were so angry that you didn't ask anything. You didn't ask why I wanted the name. You didn't ask if it mattered what gender the baby was. You just decided I was the villain in your story. You said you thought of it first, I said, and I could hear the defensiveness creeping into my voice. You said. I said a lot of things, Jessica interrupted. Her eyes were still red, but something had shifted in her tone. Less defeated, more tired. I said them because you came at me like I'd murdered someone. You were already crying. You were already disappointed. And instead of explaining myself, I got defensive. I got cruel. I made it worse. But that doesn't give you the right to write an obituary about me. My mother had sat down at some point. She was pressing her fingers to her temples in a way that suggested she was developing a migraine in real time. I'm sorry, I said again, and this time I meant it with a depth that surprised me. I'm sorry that I didn't ask. I'm sorry that I decided you were the villain without hearing your side. And I'm sorry that I handled it publicly instead of just. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't undo the TikToks, Richard said. No, I agreed. It doesn't. There was another silence. Jessica looked at Richard, and something passed between them, a look that suggested they'd been having a different conversation before they came here. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. I don't want to press charges, Jessica said. And I don't want to spend the next 5 weeks fighting with my sister while I'm trying to get ready for a baby. Jessica, Richard started. I'm not saying what she did was okay, Jessica said, still looking at him. I'm saying that I can't carry this right now. I can't carry the anger and the hurt and the legal stuff on top of everything else. My father nodded slowly, like this was a version of events he could work with. My mother opened one eye. But, Jessica continued, turning back to me, you need to actually fix this. Not just apologize. Actually fix it. How? I asked. I can't unring that bell. The obituary exists. People have read it. I don't know, Jessica said, and she sounded genuinely tired. But you're going to figure it out. And it's going to take more than just posting a sorry statement on Reddit. She turned to leave, and Richard followed her, but at the door, she paused. We still have 2 babies coming, she said without looking back at me. And they're going to be cousins. So figure out how to fix this, because I'm not letting my son grow up knowing his mother and his aunt hated each other over a name. Then she was gone. Richard was gone. And I was left standing in my living room with my parents, realizing that the actual work was just beginning. #Chunk7. The door closed behind them with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the closed door like it might open again and Jessica might come back with actual instructions, a roadmap, something concrete I could work with. Instead, there was just the sound of my father clearing his throat and my mother pressing her fingers harder against her temples. Well, my father said finally, in that tone that suggested he was choosing his words very carefully, she's right. You do need to fix this. I know, I said. But how exactly do I fix something this public? It's not like I can just. You could start by actually understanding what you did, my mother said, and there was an edge to her voice that made me look at her. Not the obituary itself, but the cascade of events that came from it. The fact that you're standing here wondering how suggests you still don't fully grasp the damage. I grasp it, I said defensively. Richard made it pretty clear. The grocery store. The TikToks. No, my mother interrupted. You grasp the symptoms. You don't grasp the disease. She finally dropped her hands and looked at me directly. Jessica was already vulnerable. She's pregnant, 5 weeks from delivery, and her hormones are through the roof. Her body doesn't feel like her body anymore. She's probably terrified about becoming a mother. And then her sister, someone she's supposed to be able to trust, writes a fake obituary about her that goes viral in their small town. I opened my mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. You didn't just embarrass her in front of strangers. You embarrassed her in front of people she sees every day. People she's going to see at the pediatrician's office. At the grocery store. At church, if they go to church. At parent-baby classes. These aren't faceless internet people, these are people in her actual life who now see her as a punchline. My father nodded. Your mother's right. And there's another issue you haven't considered. What? I asked. The custody question, he said quietly. Richard is clearly concerned about your judgment. If you're unstable enough to publicly humiliate his wife, he might be wondering what kind of influence you'll have on your own child. Whether you're a safe person to be around his. I felt my stomach drop. He wouldn't. I don't know what he would or wouldn't do, my father said. But I know that bridges like that take a very long time to rebuild, and even then, the wood is never quite as strong. Jessica seems willing to try to salvage the relationship, but he's not there yet. And frankly, I'm not sure he will be without serious, concrete action from you. So what am I supposed to do? Call the newspaper and demand they run a retraction saying the obituary wasn't real? That doesn't make any sense. Everyone already knows it was satirical. Maybe not a retraction, my mother said thoughtfully. Maybe something else. We stood in the living room for what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes. My parents exchanged one of those glances that married couples use when they're communicating entire conversations silently. Then my father stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the driveway where Jessica and Richard's car had been. You need to make a statement, he said finally. Not through Reddit. In person. Or in multiple places. You need to own what you did, and you need to do it publicly enough to counteract the original damage. Like what? A press release? That's going to look insane. Local woman apologizes for satirical obituary. That'll just remind everyone that the obituary existed in the first place. Maybe not a press release, my mother said. But something. Something that shows you understand the severity of what you did. Something that reframes the narrative. I started pacing, which was apparently my stress response because I did it without thinking. The problem is that anything I do now looks like damage control. Like I'm only sorry because I got caught. Because Richard showed up and made it clear there were consequences. Aren't you? My father asked gently. I stopped pacing. What? Would you be making this effort if Jessica had just accepted your apology? If Richard hadn't come here and articulated the actual impact? I didn't want to answer that. Because the honest answer was probably no. I would have felt vindicated. I would have felt like my message had been received, even if it was in a form neither of us was proud of. The fact that Richard came here, that he laid out the scope of the humiliation, that Jessica said she wasn't going to fight with me while pregnant, that's what made me realize I actually had to do something. So I'm a terrible person, I said flatly. You're a person who made a terrible decision, my mother corrected. There's a difference. Terrible people don't have the capacity to feel genuine remorse about terrible decisions. The fact that you're standing here grappling with this suggests you're capable of being better. My phone buzzed. Then again. And again. I pulled it out and saw notifications from Reddit, Instagram, Twitter. The story had apparently reached a new platform or been picked up by some kind of aggregator. Comments were still pouring in, and not all of them were supportive of me anymore. Someone had apparently tracked down Jessica's social media and she was being followed by what looked like hundreds of new accounts. Some supportive, some not. One comment caught my eye. This is why you don't post your revenge fantasies online. You actually hurt real people. It was downvoted, but it was there. And it was right. I need to figure out what Jessica actually wants, I said slowly. Not what I think she should want. Not what seems reasonable to me. What she actually needs from me to move past this. That's a start, my father said. But you also need to figure out what she needs from you to trust you again. Those are different things. One is about the immediate crisis. The other is about the long-term relationship. And both of those things need to happen before the baby comes, my mother added. Because once she's in postpartum recovery with a newborn and you're in the waiting room, the dynamic is going to be different. More vulnerable. If this isn't resolved by then, it's going to be a million times harder. 4 weeks and some change. That's what I had to fix a relationship that I damaged, publicly and irrevocably, and to prove to Richard that I was someone he could trust around his family. It suddenly felt like a lot less time than it sounded. #Chunk8. I started with a letter. Not an email, not a Reddit post, not something that could be screenshot and shared. An actual handwritten letter on nice paper, the kind that felt substantial in my hands. I sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, crossing things out, starting over, trying to find words that acknowledged what I'd done without making it about my own guilt or need for forgiveness. The letter explained that I understood now, really understood, what I'd done. Not the abstract concept of it, but the actual, lived experience from Jessica's perspective. I imagined her at the grocery store, recognition dawning on people's faces. The whispers. The concerned texts from friends asking if she was okay. The way a name that should have been joyful became tainted by association with humiliation. I apologized for stealing her moment of joy. I acknowledged that I'd been so hurt about the name that I'd stopped seeing her as my sister and started seeing her as an opponent. I wrote about Grandma Evangeline, and how I projected all my pain about losing her onto a name, and how unfair it was to expect Jessica to understand that or to let it dictate her choices. And then I asked her what I could do to make it better. Not what seemed appropriate. What she actually wanted. I had my mother read it before I sent it. She was quiet for a long time after she finished. This is good, she said finally. This is honest. But it's still not the public part. You still need to address what happened in the community. She was right. So I called the local newspaper, the actual newspaper, not just the online version, and I asked to speak to the editor. I told them I wanted to place an advertisement. A full public apology, not hiding in the classifieds but somewhere prominent. When they asked what it was for, I took a breath and explained that I'd been the person behind the viral obituary, and I wanted to make amends. The editor actually laughed. You're kidding. No, I said. I'm serious. He was genuinely interested then, wanted to know if I'd do an interview instead. I told him maybe later, but first I needed to try to repair the damage with my sister directly. He respected that. We arranged for a quarter-page ad to run in Sunday's paper and on their website. Writing that ad was harder than writing the letter. This wasn't private. This was addressing the whole town. I had to be specific enough that people would understand what I was apologizing for, but not so detailed that I was relitigating the entire thing. I had to acknowledge Jessica by name without making it seem performative. What I ended up with was simple. Asterisk to Jessica and to everyone in our community, I made a serious mistake when I published a satirical obituary about my sister online. What I intended as a way to express my hurt caused real harm to a real person, someone I love, someone who was about to become a mother. The viral spread of this post resulted in public humiliation that Jessica did not deserve. I am genuinely sorry for prioritizing my own wounded feelings over my sister's well-being. Revenge, even when dressed up as humor, is still revenge. And it still hurts. I'm committed to being better, to my sister, to my family, and to myself. Asterisk. The person who wrote the obituary. I didn't sign my name. I thought that might actually make it more powerful, not about me getting credit for apologizing, but about the apology itself. Then I did something harder. I went to Jessica's house. Richard answered the door, and I could see him stiffen. But I called ahead, asked Jessica if I could come by, and she'd said yes. That was the only thing that made him step aside. Jessica was in the living room, on the couch with her feet up and a heating pad on her lower back. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who was about to become a mother and was terrified and uncomfortable and didn't need her sister showing up uninvited. Except I was invited. Hi, I said, standing in their living room feeling like an intruder in my sister's own home. Hi, she said back. I brought coffee, I said, holding up a carrier with 2 cups. Decaf, because I'm not a monster. And croissants from that place you like. A hint of a smile crossed her face, the tiniest acknowledgement that I was trying. You can sit. So I sat. Richard hovered for a moment, then went upstairs, giving us privacy. I was grateful for that. I sent you a letter, I said. It should arrive tomorrow or the day after. But I wanted to say some of this in person. I owe you that. Okay, she said. I was wrong. I'm not going to keep saying that in different ways, because that starts to feel like I'm trying to get you to forgive me, and that's not what this is. This is me acknowledging that I caused you serious harm because I was hurting. That's not your fault. It's not your responsibility to manage my pain by giving me the name I wanted. She didn't respond, just sipped her decaf coffee. The name thing, I continued. I need to let that go. I'm going to. Because I realized something, naming my daughter Evangeline would have been about holding on to my grief, not about honoring Grandma. And I don't want to do that to her. I don't want her to carry the weight of being someone's way of processing loss. What will you name her? Jessica asked quietly. I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'll find something that feels right. Something that's about her, not about me. She nodded slowly. I saw the ad, she said. In the paper. It's not going to make the humiliation go away. People are still going to remember. I know, I said. I'm not expecting it to. I'm just trying to make sure they also remember that I realized what I'd done was wrong. Richard's scared, she said, and her voice cracked a little. He's scared that his baby is going to be born into this mess. He's scared that your kid and his kid are going to grow up with this tension between their mothers. I know, I said. And I'm scared too. But I want to do the work to fix it. Not fast. Not perfectly. But genuinely. She set down her coffee and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd arrived. Okay, she said finally. Okay. We'll work on it. I didn't cry, but I wanted to. Instead, I reached over and squeezed her hand, and she didn't pull away. For weeks later, I stood in the hospital waiting room holding my newborn niece, named after Richard's grandmother, a name that Jessica had chosen freely, without pressure or resentment. And when Jessica asked if I wanted to hold her first, even though she hadn't slept in 36 hours and her body was exhausted and raw, I understood that we were going to be okay. It wasn't the ending where the obstacle magically disappeared. It was the ending where 2 sisters decided, slowly and with effort, to choose each other over being right. And that was enough.